Hey guys, this is White Dog One back with another video. In this video, I'm going to show you a disaster in the Caro Kann defense. Um, I hope that you find this video instructive and that you learn from my mistakes. So, the game started off. I had black pieces. My opponent played e4, c6, the Caro Kann defense, d4, d5, e5, advanced variation, bishop to f5 with the idea of pushing e6 and getting the bishop from behind the pawn chain, knight to c3, e6, h3 limiting the scope of my bishop, c5 pawn push, being supported by my dark squared bishop, and then my opponent played g4. Um, this move was slightly premature, and black has a slight edge in this position just because white has spent yet another move pushing a pawn as opposed to simple development. Bishop to g6 retreating, bishop to e3, knight c6 developing, f4, and now I have this pawn chain coming down on this light squared bishop, and so I began to feel a little bit cramped here. In these circumstances, it's important to analyze correctly the options that are available and to not just simply move as a knee-jerk reaction, as I did. So I pressed h6, giving my bishop a retreat square. While this move didn't make me lose necessarily, it tarnished the slight edge that I had up until this point. A better continuation for me would have been to capture on d4, and then after bishop takes on d4, h6, questioning this pawn chain, undermining it, and black maintains their edge over white in this position. In the game, I played h6, bishop to d3, bishop takes, queen takes, and then yet another dubious move, c4. And the idea was just to kick the queen back, but really this move doesn't accomplish anything because all the queen has to do is move to d2, and the threat that I had created is now diminished. And I don't really have any substantial gain from that pawn move. So now white is slightly better in this position. Queen to b6, eyeing the b2 pawn. Knight to a4. This is actually a mistake by white, and I could have exploited this after queen to b5, attacking both the knight and the b2 pawn. Knight c3, defending the knight. Queen takes on b2, rook takes on b1, queen a3, rook takes b7, bishop to b4, and so now I can move my queen to a5 and create a strong pressure on this diagonal from a5 to e1. Knight g to e2, defending the knight on c3. h5, questioning the pawn chain. f5, looking for a pawn break on e6. h takes on g4, f takes on e6, f takes on e6, and now the white wins their pawn back. Rook takes on g7, g takes on e3, and this pawn, white would have to be very careful so as to not let it promote. Bishop to g5, preventing my king from castling, keeping me in the center. And now rook g to e7, allowing black to castle. And so now, if black's able to castle queenside and bring the rooks over to control these open files and semi-open files, black would actually be doing better. In the game, after knight a4, I retreated my queen, queen c7, f5, going for a pawn break on e6, and this is a common motif in Caro Kann structures for white. White seeks to undermine this pawn chain that black's creates by going for a pawn break here on e6. b5, kicking the knight away. Again, not the strongest move. It would have been better actually for black to capture here. Knight to c3, retreating. b4, knight c to e2, retreating once again. Knight g to e7, c3, b takes c3, knight takes c3. And my pawn advance on the queen side really hasn't accomplished anything. Any idea of castling queenside in the future is really not very good because of how open the queenside is. My pieces aren't developed harmoniously, and so although I have quite a bit of extra space on the queen side, because my pieces aren't developed in such a way that I can capitalize on this space advantage, really all it is just empty space for all my opponent is concerned. So knight to c8, looking to move my pieces over to the queen side where I have more space. F takes on e6, f takes on e6, and this open diagonal on the f file is quite scary, especially if my opponent can bring their rook over to f1 and dominate the f file, preventing my king from castling kingside. Knight to f3, bishop to e7, g5. A mistake by white. White's still doing good here. Perhaps a move that white should have considered is queen to c2, threatening to bring the queen to g6 and checking my king, which would make me lose castling rights, and really just solidifying my king's position in the center. In the game, after g5, h5, and the idea with this move was to keep these lines around my king side closed so that the rook would have a little bit of a harder time dominating these files. Knight to h4, bishop to b4. At this point, I'm kind of just doing anything to stay in the game and hoping that maybe I can make something out of this pin. Knight to g6. And I saw here that the white knight was aiming for this f4 square, which would be a devastating fork, absolutely destroying my pawn chain either on the flank or in the center. And there really isn't any good way for me to defend against this. Again, of course, knight to f4, provided that I'm moving my rook to safety, which I did. So I moved my rook to g8 and then knight to f4. Threatening my central pawn chain and my flank pawn. Queen to f7, attempting to defend, and now white has a very, very strong move, rook to f1. And so now the white knight has a new threat, and that threat is on d5, because now this knight can capture on d5, and because I have to move my queen out of the way to safety, the white knight is also threatening my bishop on b4. So I could move my queen over to b7. That's an idea. But at this point, white can still capture the bishop, and I can recapture, I'll just play it out real quick. But black is really just winning or losing in this position, rather. So after, queen to e7, knight takes on e6, And now this rook has this open file and is very happy. And it would be hard for me to, swing my rook over to contest this because of this knight's control of the f8 square. In the game, After I move my queen to e7, unpinning from this rook, knight to g6, attacking the queen. Queen to b7, not the best move, because now all my pieces are on the opposite side of where all the action is going on. We have this very, very powerful knight. We have this rook that's dominating the f-file. My pawn structure is very, very questionable, and as we can see, none of my pieces are really in the game. Queen to e2, bishop takes on c3, a spite check, looking to maybe bring my queen somewhere down here on the b file. B takes on c3, knight c8 to e7, just trying to exchange some of white's active pieces. Queen takes on h5, exchanging the knights. Better move instead of a knight exchange would have been knight to f5, because now the white rook has a little bit of a harder time controlling this f-file. Of course, moves like knight to h4, discovered check on the king, king moves, knight takes, pawn takes, rook takes, and white has just developed this crushing kingside attack against me, and there's really no way for me to defend. It would be an appropriate situation to resign, put simply. In the game, after the knights are exchanged, queen takes, check, king to d8, rook to f7, attacking my queen, queen to b2, trying to create any chance of counterplay that I can. Rook to c1, queen h2, queen takes on e6, queen to h1 check, king d2, queen to h2, rook to f2, and at this point I had about 10 seconds left on my clock, and I ended up resigning a couple moves after, like one move after this rather. I just want to show a possible continuation where white could really just capitalize on their devastating attack. After I move my queen to safety, queen to g3, I lose my rook on g8, check. I lose my rook. I could lose my rook on a8, but that actually wouldn't be the strongest continuation. While it would still be crushing, there's an even stronger continuation. After queen to f7 check, king c8, queen to e6 check, king b7, and now white rook dominating the b file, dominating the f file. There's really nowhere for my king to run at this point. King c7, rook to f7 check. There's only one safe square for the king, unless I, but in this position, I could play knight e7, rook takes on e7 check, king d8, and there's mate in 1. Can you find it? Queen d7, checkmate, putting me out of my misery. But that was my disaster in the Caro Kann defense. A lot of opportunities to learn from the mistakes made, and I hope that you can take this and apply some of the lessons into your games. And until the next video, I wish you good luck in your chess, and bye for now.